Coming up, we take a look at the very reflective and honest quotes from Mikal Bridges as he closes out the 2023-24 season. Do we believe that the next year can be a brighter one for Mikal, now knowing what it means to have the spotlight on him in Brooklyn? We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Arbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, on the heels of the Jordi Fernandez hire, on the heels of a disappointing season, we also get some takeaways from Mikal Bridges first and foremost, and a lot of Nets players that we'll talk about over the next couple of days. Honesty. Just direct kind of honesty that you usually don't get from players, usually don't get from coaches or organizations as seasons wind down like this.
Yeah, exit interviews for the Nets, and these can sometimes just be very vanilla on the surface, kind of like season's over, let's get out of here kind of thing. And sometimes it can be actually honest and self-reflective and reflective on the season. And I think by and large, that's what we got here with the Nets. And these are quotes pulled from some of the guys who cover the Nets out there. I'm just going to throw out the names out there, like Eric Slater, Lucas Kaplan, some of the guys that we're going to end up, pulling some of these quotes from. Nets, I think, for as bad as the Nets season was, Nets beat coverage, I think, still remains some of the best out there. And that's been a season over season over season kind of thing with the Nets. Either way, exit interview time. And we start with Mikal Bridges, who gave some, and we're going to go through a lot of quotes here because there's some interesting ones, but gave quotes that I think at a high level passed the sniff test for a lot of the things we wondered about during the season in terms of like how he was sort of going as the season went on. And I think he opened up in a way that A, you don't hear players really do that often, and B, kind of just at least snaps into focus sort of what was happening here over the last couple months of the season, and at least helps to make sense of it, even if it doesn't improve the results. And nothing can change the results, but it at least was self-reflective in a way that I think fans can appreciate, even if the results weren't there.
Yeah, you want awareness, right? And you say during the season, you get the cliche things after losses. Well, we got to do better. We got to play tougher for Mikal Bridges or anybody, right? And you're not expecting really in-depth analysis, but to come out of this season and maybe have Mikal get in front of the microphones and say, yeah, we just got to stay more focused, get more dialed in, handle the X's and O's, and then we can turn this around next year. It would feel like a little bit of lip service at best, and at worst, a player that maybe didn't understand the gravity of what his responsibility was coming over from Phoenix in that trade for Kevin Durant. So on a personal level here, for one of the first takeaways we had from his exit interview compiled by Lucas Kaplan over on Nets Daily, I think it was really tough just personally. Bridges said, I just got a couple of gray hairs, wanting to win and compete and being frustrated on a lot of things, being frustrated at myself. You just got to go through it sometimes. You have expectations, you have goals, and sometimes you don't reach those goals. Life has a funny way of just humbling you a little bit, but it's always for the greater good. So, point stop right there. It is the both and. This was not good. It was really rough for me, and hopefully it helps me now take the next step of where I thought my career was probably going after 27 games a season ago in Brooklyn. I expected it to be more of the same, but you have to take a step back maybe sometimes to get those next couple steps forward.
Yeah, say that it was a humbling experience is good, right? Like, and that's not something that you always hear from athletes who want to, a lot of times athletes, I think, get to this point with a chip on their shoulder. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. I think you need to have it, right? Like, there's very few guys that can end up being professional athletes. Sometimes the thing that gets you that last piece along the finish line, like that last mile, is just me against the world mentality. And sometimes that me against the world mentality lends itself to sort of a chippiness behavior or this idea that everyone's against you, and does not lead to humbling experiences, leads to like sort of anger and standoffishness. And we're not seeing that. And Bridges, I don't think ever was at risk of this, but to hear him speak like this was something that we wondered over the course of the season, that like what basically was the losing getting to him. Right. And there's some other quotes that shine a light on that. Yeah, it was. But when he makes a reference to, I got a couple gray hairs, the part where like this was a stressful experience for him, especially probably compounded by how last year, the after the trade finish, right? Like the 2022-23 season, how that finished with, they got swept out of the playoffs, but sort of expectations and sort of vibes were very high, right? Off of his experience, probably the zenith of what it'll ever be for his career, probably at this point, short of winning, a championship or something. Like the vibes were so high on him that we were having conversations that frankly feel crazy now, but about like sort of his place in the NBA. So no one, it seems like, is more aware sort of that high, and then to come into this year and have it just kind of go every which way and wrong.
Yeah.
That it's very clear from him that like the frustration had gotten to him in like a not great way.
Yeah, and you mentioned it too there, the end of last season versus coming into this season. Listen, last year, nobody really cared that the Brooklyn Nets, outside of the fan base and the organization, that you guys were going out there and playing big basketball and putting up a lot of points. Great. Your season was already over. That was all understood. So I think when you come into the following year, maybe specifically to Mikal Bridges, well, the opposition looks in, the scouting report says, Mikal Bridges is threat number one. Let's go ahead and make his life really hard, and then we'll break things down from there. That's a different level for Mikal Bridges walking onto the court for an 82-game season, having the opposition say, he is the guy we take out of the game. He's the guy we make sure that we get in front of him when he wants to get to his spaces in the mid-range game, right? He's the guy that even on the offensive end for oppositions, let's try to tax him. Let's try to get switches. Let's put bigger bodies on him, faster bodies on him. So you end up taking all of these areas for Mikal that are positives in his game and having every team probably in the league come onto the court early in the season especially and say, okay, let's go ahead and prove it. Great, you proved it on Tuesday. Now prove it on Thursday and on Saturday and on Monday, right? And that you can understand why that would have a cumulative impact on Mikal over the course of the season. Coming up here in a second, another reflective personal quote from him as far as his game and his individual headspace. And then we'll talk about how he reflected on the team at a high level and whether or not ultimately do we think this all adds up to Mikal Bridges being a better version of himself when we step back onto the court next season. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Monopoly Go. Look, if you're competitive like me, we've been there, player, a fan, it's halftime. Scoreboard is not looking so good. Maybe you're feeling a little low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you want to dig deep, get that competitive juice flow, and lift your head up and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends, get the most riches, and build the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but it's on your phone anytime with tons of twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You make your friends bankrupt. Who doesn't love that? By smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. Charge other players rent for those iconic properties. You can even work with your friends, crack open those community chests in tournaments, get a few extra rewards along the way. Climb the leaderboard, baby. Get back out there. Put on your game face, download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Once again, that's download Monopoly Go free on the App Store or Google Play.
All right, so as we continue our postseason reflection, as in the season is over, reflection on the Brooklyn Nets, not the postseason playoff basketball, though we'll have some of that to talk about along the way. Mentioned there some of the other personal quotes here. This one came from Eric Slater, was asking him, and you mentioned him at the top, just as another tip of the cap to him. He mentioned completing his second full year covering the team. And as a lot of people drifted away from the Brooklyn Nets organization on a high level and on a media level, Slater came in and has really done a wonderful job. So an extra congratulations to him. He asked Mikal Bridges when he was thinking back to what he sees as the difference between his finish last year and this year. Mikal said, I didn't have the right headspace. I wasn't as strong and positive as I should have been towards the end, being so beat up mentally and lacking confidence. I think that hurt me. Do you feel like, I always do this, I always put questions to you. I feel like even if I would want him to have come in with a better mentality from that standpoint, I have to acknowledge it's probably impossible to come in with that headspace when you've never had to do it before. There's never been a time in his career where that was the expectation. So when we talk about the way other teams are going to approach him game over game, you probably have to go through it. Do I wish that he could have rounded it out sooner over the course of the year? Sure. But then I can point to 1,000 other reasons inside this organization why that wouldn't have mattered relative to results.
Yeah, it's his first time as a team of like being the guy, right? Like, which is what he came into the season as. He had never been that before. As for a whole season, he had the brief stint, sort of being that at the end of last year, where it kind of feels like found money, honestly, right? At the end of that year, you're feeling a little bit, at least from the fan base, as you're playing with house money, to use a couple mixed metaphors here, but like you're playing with house money because the expectations are really low. He's playing so much better than anyone really ever expected. Even when everyone liked that they got him in the trade, I mean, he was so much better than the expectations. So then to come into this year as the guy, he's on all the marketing material. He's on the big banners. It's his face. He's being sold to season ticket holders. He's the guy. He's the superstar you're going to pair other superstars with. I mean, it's the whole thing, right? Yeah. It's the whole entire, the whole entire face of a franchise gamut that they ran him through. And he knows it. And so then when you're that guy and then you don't play as well, yeah, like it's not shocking to hear these quotes from him, right? Like, is that kind of, I don't know if that's answering your question or not, but like that seems to be sort of like the cumulative look at sort of like what happened this year.
Yeah, that is the question. That is, I think, the ultimate perspective here of like, hey, I got blindsided by what it means. One thing on a high level before we're going to mention, Cam Johnson also talked about Mikal specifically. There's not, in terms of these exit interviews, a ton that I take away from Cam Johnson. There's some players that matter more than others, but he did reference Mikal. On a high level, do you think that the way that this season went for Mikal will reflect, in the grand scheme, whenever it happens, players wanting or not wanting to play with him? Because whether or not it was a new set of circumstances for him, we know certain personalities, certain superstar personalities, not all of them, but certain ones demand a type of player to be alongside them, to be a part of that process. While it's nice for us to hear Mikal Bridges reflecting on his struggles and what he should have done better, I do wonder if players around the league go, well, that's good. I don't know if I want you to be reflecting about that a season after I show up and we go through, a rough patch and you're not quite where we need you to be.
I don't think so, actually. I think that we probably tend to focus on a little bit more on that. I think he's still a very well-liked guy. I mean, it like drives fans nuts when they see him like sort of interacting with the Knicks guys. That's something that I can care about. I personally care less about. I think you speak for both of us. Like, who cares? But but I think I think our general who cares sort of vibe is my guess as to like how the rest of the NBA
the players feel about that. Yeah,
I think so. I just it would feel insane to me if they didn't. I mean, that's like a fraternity of which, it's a close-knit fraternity of which it's probably much more supportive than you would probably imagine. Also, this is such a minor thing, but even if we thought that was the case, they just released the U.S. Olympic team for the next round, and it's just all the superstars. And he's not on it, but he was mentioned as one of three guys, as like sort of an alternate guy. And right when they mentioned him, I was like, oh, okay, never mind. Like, he still has very high value within these circles because the other alternates were like Brunson, him, and then someone else. And I was thinking, even if we wanted to just make up some kind of story about this, like the fact that his name is still floated in that group made me feel it's so minor, and maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I just thought, okay, I think the value is still there. I do think there was one more quote that I wanted to highlight here, though, is that looking, because they asked him directly sort of like about the season, and he just says it was a failure 100%, right? He's actually doesn't mix any words. He says a failure 100%. It's tough seeing the teams that are in the playoffs. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. And you just know the talent we have and things like that. I don't think there was any part of my brain that thought I'd be sitting here talking to you guys like this before the season. You got to be better. I think the part where I'm not encouraged by this, but the part where he says it was a failure, but there's also a recognition of we had too much talent to be here. I think like that
because we're too good to have not accomplished something more.
It kind of gave me a little hope for like next year. It's like new coach. We have the talent. This didn't work out. I'll drop the responsibility at my doorstep here, which is we're just too good. We're just too good to like have this work out the way it worked out, even if there were other systemic problems. I don't know. I thought that was just a really honest, reflective look, and just being like, we have to be better. So anyway, it's a lot of the same flavor, but I don't know. I just think it is. I don't know if you can say all the right things, but you can definitely say the wrong things or nothing in these interviews. And Bridges didn't go that way, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Didn't say the wrong thing. Didn't say the bad thing. Said something of substance.
Actually, I take it back. I think he said the right thing. This was the right thing. Like this, anything else,
took responsibility personally.
Anything else like this would have either been a non-answer or a lie. Like anything else that he said from this, it would have just been a non-answer, which I think we all would have just been fine with non-answers because that's just how things usually go. Or it would have been a bold-faced lie that no one would ever believe. And it's neither of those things. So I guess in that sense, these were the right answers.
And it's funny too, because I'll add in here. We'll talk about it. Just this one quote from Cameron Johnson, only because it's really referencing Mikal. Well, it's not him specifically; it's a team-wide thing across the board. Where our production wasn't in the same spot. Our team identity, execution wasn't where it should be. When he's talking about beyond Mikal Bridges, it's a team overall thing. And one other spot that you can go back to Mikal and say is, he also didn't throw the team, the organization under the bus. And almost no one does this unless you're looking to go scorched earth and make your exit, make your exit interview from the season also be an exit from the franchise kind of interview. But remember, you go from head coach, interim head coach, all of the upheaval that you walk through there obviously changes the dynamic. Ben Simmons being healthy or not, right? We'll get into that a little bit more here, I think, in a second. What were the factors outside of Mikal Bridges' control? And whether or not we think that he just should have been better, you could also point some fingers, even passively, and say there was a lot happening for the organization this year, right? We had a lot of injuries. You could have pointed anywhere else. And instead, Mikal went, me personally, I didn't play up to the standards. I had a rough time mentally with this season. And as a team, we failed to accomplish the goals that we feel like our talent would suggest we're capable of. So, yeah, you're probably right. It's not saying the wrong thing or a bad thing. You said all the right stuff here. And this is about as vibey as I think we get on this podcast, where this means nothing to wins and losses on the court. And yet it does make me feel better, or at least optimistic, that Mikal will be the best version of himself going into next season, as opposed to maybe a guy that you have some real questions about where he's going to be moving forward, was still an elevated role. It's still going to be elevated expectations for him, even if we think it's not the same bar that was set in 22-23.
Yeah, and actually, there's one more. I know we have the Cam Johnson quote, or maybe you just said that, and then I have one more actually along those lines that he said, because there was like 3 or 4 really sort of block quotes that I think really highlighted that, and I want to actually bring up one more, which has to go with his headspace going into next year. We'll get into that here in a second. First, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing as well. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. It's because right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You'll love to hear that. Bet on everything from slap shots, that's hockey, home runs, that's baseball, slam dunks, I think you know what sport that is, basketball, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so obviously, as we talk about end of season and exit interviews, Mikal Bridges, at least saying all the right things, taking the responsibility on his shoulders, as you would want one of the leaders of your team to do. I do want to talk about some of the extenuating circumstances that this season did present that would hurt Mikal Bridges' ability to be successful. But what was the additional quote you want to add in here?
Oh, yeah, he just had one more. He says, I think I was just too mental on myself on wanting to win so bad and being so frustrated on things. I think it kind of took away from everything. I played the game with joy. That's how I played. And I think when I got people asking me and talking to me about, quote, this internal quote, you don't look the same. That's strictly off my emotions. And that means something. That means I'm not there how I want to be. And I found that another one to be like the recognition that even other parties were asking him during the season, like, hey, what's going on? And like, because if you look at the numbers for him, it's like you can see where you mentioned vibes. You can see where the vibes start dipping. I mean, really almost like on a game-to-game basis through the course of the season. The numbers we talked about this so many times in the podcast, so I won't belabor it, but the numbers just totally drop off a cliff. Like he stops shooting anything but threes, basically. He's not getting to the line. He's not scoring. He's basically not taking any more shots. It doesn't look like he's actively engaged on the offensive end. He'll try to get actively engaged and then kind of just duck out of it, and that'll be the end of the possession. And that is a 1-for-1 thing with like this quote, which is to say, it looks like you're not even having fun playing. I think that it's hard to hear when someone is not having fun playing, because can be a death knell. Saying it, and it's funny. This I'm going to go 1 second personal here. My wife and I have a rule that when things are bothering us, you have to say it out loud, and then ta-da! Usually, when you say something out loud, you start feeling better about it. Like it's like this. It's kind of it's like a life hack, and it's really shifts a lot of the different things that, like, for anxiety or whatever.
Is that hold on, just real quick, and I don't want to get personal here, but I ball it up and then I shove it down. I thought
That's also a
you
good
turned that
strategy.
bad vibe into a lump of delicious coal. Is that not the?
That's also a viable strategy. There's another strategy where you just say it out loud and then all it's like, ta-da, it actually starts getting better. I'm being serious. Like, so
No, no.
when you, I know you're kidding. When I hear something like this, I'm like, well, guess what? The best way to cure some of these things is not to just go out and like deal with it internally and try to make it. It's to say it out loud. So it's sort of out there in the open and then move on. And when I read that one about the joy in the game, it was like, yeah, it showed up in the stats. And now it's out there for everyone to sort of see. And I think when that's the case, it actually becomes easier to kind of kickstart again down the line.
Yeah, and obviously, I'm making a joke there, but it's interesting to think about it. I can't help but correlate it like to Ben Simmons when he's getting all those questions. And listen, that hasn't worked out. The injuries have piled up. But they talked about, because it was also the mental side, the mental aspect of things, his mental health was a part of that narrative. So he's trying to answer those questions and you're trying to address them honestly, but also maybe it's none of your business. We know that in sports, if Mikal Bridges had come out 63 games through the season and said, honestly, I'm really struggling with like having joy in playing the game right now. I don't feel like myself out there. If he had kind of verbalized some of the struggles, and I'm not knocking, I think you're correct here. This is something he can do for himself personally. He doesn't have to do it in front of the cameras. But we know from a sports standard, oh my God, just blood in the water. The Sharks would have been injured, right? Not mentally.
No. You have
that's
to.
not what you're saying. This isn't about doing it publicly. This is for himself to realize, I should have seen this for myself and let it out during the season in my own apartment by myself with Cam Johnson, right? To let it off my chest, because it ended up being a burden it looks like he carried internally down the stretch.
Sometimes you do need the distance to be able to reflect, right? Reflections don't happen when you're sitting in the middle of the mirror, right? You're just part of it.
Oh, good.
At that point, you're just part of the mirror. Like, you don't see your reflection in the water when you're in the water. Like, it's just like you're just part of the water. And so the only time sometimes reflection can happen is when you are standing outside of it and then therefore looking back inside of it. Oh no, if he had said that during the year, maybe he wouldn't even have recognized it. Like, it's the season's over. We've written the final chapter in the season. It's done, the end. And now it's time to go back and sort of like do a look at like what that book was all about. That's where it's more possible. I agree with you. If he got up on the podium after a game, he's like, this isn't so much fun. Oh yeah, that would have been the absolute end. That would have been the absolute end. Right. But looking back at it now, reflecting on it, it went this way. He takes personal responsibility. He recognizes the joy part. The hope is that if the thing were to happen again, you will then go back to the time where you self-reflected and say to yourself, I remember this, and let's stop this now. Like, let's get this train back on the track. That's the process. Sitting there in the water and being like, I'm drowning, as you just slowly go down. That's not reflective. That's just the end. So I do think that like there's a time and a place for sort of all this to happen. This feels correct to me, as I guess what I'm saying.
Reflecting on whether or not you're buoyant enough to float or you should start swimming, that's a little bit neither here nor there. Get yourself to shore and then consider how you could have done better.
And last thing for me, because I know I'm talking forever about this, but like the very last thing is, it takes guts to say stuff like this. In this day and age where you can look weak by saying stuff like this, and you are in a sport that sort of like demands toughness, right? Like physical and mental toughness. You run the risk of looking weak saying like stuff like this. I personally don't see it that way, but like there is a risk around saying things like that you'll be seen as sort of like lesser when it comes to this stuff. I don't think that's going to be the case here, but I do think it does take guts to kind of talk like this.
No, and that's why I mentioned earlier about, how do you think it has any impact in terms of the way other players perceive them or not? And sometimes I think we have kind of pushed this threshold here where the understanding that even if Mikal never said this stuff publicly, that he can have those conversations, and that a lot of players might have those type of reflective conversations, but you won't say it in front of the microphones, because if you do that, then perceptually, right, there's still that, I think, battle of the way you're supposed to be perceived versus just, hey man, of course, sometimes work is hard. Sometimes getting up and going to the office every day when I'm not hitting my numbers is a real bummer, and it shouldn't be this hard for players or athletes to be that honest about it.
Because like usually with millionaire athletes, people are like, nobody wants to hear it, right? Right? It's like nobody wants to. I'm not prescribing this to him, but I do most times with like people that make $20 million a year to play basketball. There is a general feeling too of like, oh, cry me a river, please.
Sure.
right? Like, now I'm not saying that, but this is the other risk you run with like sounding like you might be complaining, is that you're also, there's a very good chance it's going to fall on deaf ears also if you say it wrong.
How dare these people be human beings? And that's really always been my number one problem with athletes.
No, but I guess there are situations where I will say like, hey, cry me a river. Come on. Like, this is what you signed up for.
Of course.
This is part of the deal. Part of the deal is there's going to be scrutiny around this when the stakes get really high.
And to your point, when you reflect on your season, Mikal Bridges, and say like, man, I was struggling. I knew I needed to do better. He's saying it in a self-effacing way of like, I realized that I was having a hard time accomplishing what I needed to, what I should be doing. Right. Not when you sometimes hear superstar talents, and Mikal doesn't even necessarily fit that category, at the end of a long season where they get bounced out early in the playoffs. Hey, listen, man, what do you want me to do? I'm doing everything I can out there. I need better talent around me. Those are usually the times when you go, yeah, well, you know what? Cry me a river. You're making a ton of money. Why don't you go ahead and do that Herculean lift that everyone's so excited about? The last thing for me that I'll just tie a bow on with this is the other side of all this. I mentioned it a little bit. It's not just the Ben Simmons injury, right? You also have Cam Johnson misses time. You have guys come in and out of the lineup early in this season. You are, if you're Jacque Vaughn, initially over the first handful of games of the year, you're trying to figure out when Simmons comes back, the Claxton-Simmons combination. We talk a lot about, well, were they running schemes? Were they really getting plays that helped Mikal Bridges be successful? Like, all of those elements too are something that any player's gonna have to take on their own chest. But hey, guess what? I could name a lot of other teams and a lot of other coaches, even without superstar talents on them, where I think Mikal might have had a better season based on confidence in what was in place there for him to be successful. So all things that we can sit here and reflect on kind of glowingly now the season is over. I like what he said. I hope it carries forward, and I hope it informs the way he approaches next year when it comes to the Nets.
Yeah, I think look, whoever knows how these things work, and you don't know. But again, like, just to go back to the beginning, you can say one of three things. You can say the right thing, nothing, or the wrong thing. And I think that, like, in this case, we have to look at it and just say, like, knowing how the season worked out, at least from an exit interview standpoint and being reflective, this is about as right as you can get when it comes to Mikal Bridges. All right, we're going to come back tomorrow, talk a little bit Cam Thomas exit interview, bunch of great stuff from that one as well as we roll through the offseason. Make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to podcasts and to YouTube as well.
Another way you can leave your exit interviews is as such. Hello, fellow fan. This you should me. I leave power. Good. Thank you. Thank you. D. Reynolds, care of one Charlie Kelly.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.